Welcome to this presentation of San Francisco Operations Consulting and the team at Engine 90. My name is Richard Ellert. The topic today will cover the challenges of establishing a foothold in China from a supply chain perspective. This program is meant for companies that are contemplating going to China, although some of this information is relevant for companies that are already there and experiencing challenges. But first, a quick word about Engine 90 and San Francisco Operations Consulting. I have joined a partnership called Engine 90. It's an integrated team of experts, practitioners, and specialized firms covering a broad range of capabilities. The focus is on providing a much more actionable and cost-effective alternative to traditional consulting firms. We start each project with a structured problem-solving approach that taps the power of insights that already reside in your organization. The E90 platform connects clients with the expertise, models, and people required to actually turn plans into action. I have learned, sometimes the hard way, that expertise cannot be gained from books or trolling the internet. My experiences, all good and bad, can allow me to quickly identify major risk factors. In turn, this experience can help turn your plans into successes. So without further delay, let's discuss China and its challenges as well as opportunities. There are many stories about doing business in China. Occasionally I remind myself of the story of Icarus, who was so intent on flying to the sun. I think we all know how that epic story ended. So why China? What is the attraction? What is the business case for being in China? You probably hear about the term LCC, or low-cost country, being often associated with China. Well, I believe that in today's environment, LCC should really stand for lower cost country. In this presentation, we will explore if and when China is a good option for your supply chain requirements, and also whether there are viable alternatives. The attraction to China is rooted in the old perception that with 1.4 billion people, there must be a huge pool of unemployed workers waiting around to produce all sorts of goodies for the equivalent of a bowl of rice a day. Although this was true in the late 80s and early 90s when China first opened to the world, these days nothing could be further from the truth. And it must be easy to access the millions of factories waiting to manufacture the goods we need. China is growing at such a pace that finding employment for most Chinese is not an issue. In the old days, most jobs were located in southern China in the Guangdong province, mostly due to the proximity to Hong Kong, which served as a platform for Westerners doing business with Hong Kong-based operators. Although that region still sees enormous industrial activity, the need to ship workers from faraway provinces has become a real challenge. In fact, there is now a significant shortage of qualified workers in this region, since they can easily find jobs close to their homes and family. Scarcity of labor has driven prices up, in many cases due to the government intent on increasing minimum wages at a fast pace. In 2009, the government declared that it intended to double the minimum wage in 5 years. Today, it is a reality. And to top it all up, material cost continues to increase at an unheard of pace. Let me give you an example as to why low wages do not always equate to low cost. Let me give you an example as to why low wages do not always equate to low cost. Let's assume for a moment that we are currently producing in the US a consumer product made mostly of resin-injected parts, decoration, simple electrical parts, and packaging. In the past 5 years, material costs such as resin, paper, copper, etc. has gone up at a double-digit rate year over year, and these are commodities, which implies that prices are fairly equal across the world markets. Labor cost in China has gone up between 10 and 15% yearly for the last 5 years, essentially doubling minimum wage in 5 years. Historically, labor cost in consumer product rarely exceeds 20% of the overall cost, if we include factory profit, logistics, certifications, and all other associated costs. The lesson here being that focusing solely on decreased labor can lead to miscalculation, since the impact of a 15% increase on labor represents only a 3% overall cost increase. Focusing on issues such as logistics, transportation, flexibility, tying up of cash flow, distance, quality control, certification, and so forth can usually yield significant cost savings that may often exceed the advantages of lower cost labor. There are many pitfalls in doing business in China, and my intent is to help you better understand what these are and to guide you through the decision process as well as eventual implementation of your plan. Making the decision to outsource or move operations to China requires a well thought out strategy. This quick guide to the decision process will help you ask the right questions and proceed methodically. Everything about doing business in China is primarily about risk management. It will take time, effort, resources, and lots of patience. As mentioned, the process itself takes time, and the decision to enter China cannot be taken lightly. So before we get into this, be prepared to answer the important questions that follow, honestly and pragmatically. And if you're not sure of the answers, it is time to take a step back and ask for help. So what are the important questions to ask? The first one is, do I clearly understand why I intend to move some or all of my operations to China? Have I looked at alternatives, some of them closer to home? And did I go through a pros and cons study of the alternatives? Do I understand the financial, regulatory, and administrative challenges? Do I have in-house staff with the required experience? And finally, are there any issues linked to IP or proprietary processes? Do I have a plan in terms of controlling the quality and safety of my products? Am I able to absorb increased lead times initially as part of the transition process? Do I have a strong enough product development team capable of communicating effectively with China? Am I able to deal with the cash flow requirements of an increased product cycle timetable? Do I have a team on the ground capable of dealing with the day-to-day issues at the factory level? And finally, how are my customers and employees likely to respond to our exploration of doing business in China? Once you have answered all these questions, then it's time to move to the 5 keys of the decision process. And what are those 5 keys? First, what is your primary motivation for looking at China? Be mindful of the lack of credible and verified information. In China, nothing is quite what it seems. The role of government is paramount to any business decision. And finally, there are no established or standard ways of doing business in China, except for the fact that you must question everything. So let's expand together on these 5 keys of the decision process. What is your primary motivation for looking at China? Well, let's remember that this is for the long term. Nothing you do in China can be done quickly. There are simply no shortcuts when doing business in China. Shortcuts equate with disaster. Is this a need, or am I simply getting on the bandwagon because my competitors are in China? Am I being pressured on cost, diversity, or ability by my competitors or my customers for that matter? Is China my simplest and only option available? And finally, do I have the expertise internally to deal with the challenges, or should I seek external help? Next, let's talk about the lack of credible information. We can all agree that any decision at any level requires access to credible information. Information in China is tightly controlled by the government at all levels, and there are many layers of government involved. Corporate reporting in general is unreliable, unless you're dealing with a listed company or a company that is administered under US GAAP or Western Standard GAAP. The information that is provided to potential customers is fashioned according to the need of the moment. The relationship between private and government is often blurred, and this is important for companies to understand that this level of cooperation between government and private enterprise is one of the backbones of doing business in China. The next is nothing is ever what it seems. Remember that Chinese culture and business ethics are not established on Western standards. They have 5,000 years of culture and ways of doing things, and they're not going to change it for their customers. Now, Chinese in general are very good at adapting to Western requirements, but it's important for Westerners to adapt to the Chinese ways of doing business. One of the keys is to ask questions. You have to ask lots of questions, and you have to ask them repeatedly. It's important to understand how they're financed, who controls the company, what is their history. You have to ask for a list of customers and references, and you have to check those references carefully. And if possible, you have to investigate independently. And finally, you must find out about their relationship with local government entities. Now let's talk about the role of government. Most enterprises in China started off as state-owned enterprises. Even though they were privatized, the management has stayed in place in many cases, and connections to the government are rarely severed. The Chinese government is very active in business matters. There are many layers and a multitude of administrations who can influence, sometimes control, how a business entity will fare. You have to understand the political structure surrounding the business you're exploring. You should identify and hire a local accountant or administrator who is connected to local government. This person will facilitate conversation with local government, although at no time this person should be in charge of operations, bank accounts, or communication with customers. You have to meet with local government. They will often give subtle hints on how to deal with issues facing your business. And most importantly of all, you must investigate that business's status with customs and tax authorities. These authorities have the capability and the power to literally suspend or shut down a business. And it's important for you to understand if this is a potential threat. And finally, there are no standard ways of conducting business in China. Everything in China is local. China is a very big country. They speak 2 languages. Often people in the south can't understand what the ones in the north are saying, and vice versa. And people in Hong Kong or Beijing may be treated as a foreigner in other provinces of China. So unless you are a large company, a Walmart, a GE, an Airbus, your expertise must be local. Everything you do has to be in line with mitigating risk. You have to deal with banking and supply chain issues up front. Once business is going, it is very difficult to try to resolve those types of issues which require lots of approvals, lots of paperwork, and a number of administrations have to be involved in the process. You have to find trustworthy local help. This takes time, it takes effort, but it's doable over time. You have to be wary of offers to help smooth the path in front of you. It is never done in an altruistic fashion. I hope this information has been helpful as a first step into a long process ahead. In future communications, I intend to address other issues facing Western companies trying to get a foothold in China, or for those already there but facing challenges. Thank you for your attention, and don't hesitate to ask for help.